Supergirl's fallout is bigger than you think, and we gotta talk about what it really exposes. Why the Supreme Court just humiliated Trump on birthright citizenship, but gave him a huge advantage in the midterms by lifting spending limits. We go inside the crazy North Carolina inmate revolt. And if you've bought a PC, an iPad, or even a smartphone recently, you might actually be the victim of a massive corporate conspiracy. We're talking about all of that and even more on today's brand new Philip DeFranco show. You daily dive into the news, starting with this. Trump just got hit with a devastating decision from the Supreme Court. In one of its most anticipated rulings this term, the Supreme Court voted to uphold the right to birthright citizenship. And so you had them striking down the executive order signed on the first day of Trump's second term, which declared that babies born in the US cannot be granted citizenship if their parents were in the country illegally or temporarily. Now, it's also important that we get into the details for a number of reasons, starting with the fact that if you were looking at the headlines or even going into the body of these news pieces, you might have seen some conflicting information about whether the justices ruled 5-4 or 6-3. And the truth there is that it was genuinely confusing, so we should break it down. Right, so on one side, you had Justices John Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett joining the court's liberals and the majority, ruling that Trump's order violated both federal law and the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, which explicitly states, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. But then on the other side, you had Justices Clarence Thomas, Neil Gorsuch, and Samuel Alito dissenting. Right, and so it's Brett Kavanaugh where things start to get a little confusing, right? Because you had him agreeing with the majority that Trump's order violated federal law, specifically the Nationality Act of 1940, which codified birthright citizenship into federal statute. But Kavanaugh also partially dissented, rejecting the court's finding that Trump's order violated the 14th Amendment, which is then why you had some outlets saying the court ruled 6-3 that the order violated federal law and 5-4 that it violated the Constitution. But that discrepancy aside, I cannot understate how massive of a decision this is. Right, this would have changed how we define citizenship in the US in the most fundamental way, since the 14th Amendment guaranteed citizenship to formerly enslaved people shortly after the Civil War. Though also, right, the interpretation that birthright citizenship applies to the children of illegal immigrants, that actually has roots about 130 years old, when the Supreme Court ruled in favor of a man by the name of Wong Kim Ark. Because you had this guy who was born in San Francisco to Chinese parents, and you had the court ruling that he was considered a US citizen, establishing the long-held principle that the 14th Amendment automatically grants citizenship to any baby born in America. Though there are a few limited exceptions, like the children of foreign diplomats. And you've had that since then, just being the precedent kind of set in stone. But then you had a lawyer for the Trump administration, Solicitor General D. John Sauer, arguing in court that birthright citizenship had created a birth tourism industry, and claiming that, quote, uncounted thousands of foreigners from potentially hostile nations have flocked to give birth in the United States in recent decades. And you had Sauer also claiming that the phrasing of the 14th Amendment invokes a certain political allegiance that is required to be a US citizen, and arguing that the Constitution did not grant citizenship to the children of temporary visitors or illegal aliens who have no such allegiance. But then on the other side, you had an attorney for the ACLU, which sued to block Trump's order, hitting back, saying that the phrasing Sauer was referring to has long been interpreted to refer to the children of foreign diplomats and others, not children born on US soil to those here illegally or temporarily, arguing the framers of the 14th Amendment meant to have universal law of citizenship subject to narrow exceptions. Also beyond that, you had dozens of professors filing a briefing supporting the legal challenge and arguing that Trump's order, it would just be completely disastrous. Right, according to those experts, around 250,000 kids would have been born without citizenship in the US each year under Trump's order. So you're talking about roughly 5 million by 2045. And many of them, they said they'd probably be left just without a nationality entirely, right? Because their parents would either be unwilling or unable to obtain citizenship for their US-born kids in their homelands. And that's on top of what you had professors arguing would be enormous economic consequences. And in fact, that was echoed in another brief by over 140 scholars, where it said that immigrants and their citizen children, they're essential to balancing the aging US workforce, increasing the national GDP, and overall providing net positive fiscal contributions. You had them arguing that Trump's order, it would likely cause mass deportations that could result in labor shortages and increased inflation. And as far as more from the Supreme Court justices themselves, you had Roberts, who of course is a conservative, writing the majority opinion and arguing, citizenship then and now was the right to have rights to freely participate in our political community. The framers of the 14th Amendment extended that promise to every freeborn person in this land, and saying we keep that promise today. But then with the dissenting justices, you had them kind of echoing the Trump administration's talking points. Or with Alito writing, this is one of the most important decisions in the history of the court, and in my judgment, the court has made a serious mistake, and adding that the ruling will seriously affect the country's future. And then as far as Trump's response, this is one of the times where I don't get to say that Trump had a meltdown. He, at least publicly facing, is not as pissed off as you might expect, at least as of I'm recording this. Right, that is definitely subject to change, because this order, it was very obviously a massive deal to him. Trump cared about this case so much, he literally went to attend oral arguments at the Supreme Court. And you might remember that. It marked the first time ever in US history that a sitting president's done that. And that's seen largely because of the whole separation of powers thing. You usually don't want the president there because it might seem like he's trying to intimidate the Supreme Court into voting a certain way. way. But this is Trump, different times. So it also, one, might be because he's getting used to losing, or two, because he is getting some other wins that we'll get to. But I mean, just another example of his reaction when he took a L. The Supreme Court, right? Remember when they struck down his tariffs? It was another one of his most important policies, and he went ballistic. He called them unpatriotic, disloyal to our Constitution, a disgrace to our nation, and that's among other things. Well, today, as of recording, he did send off a number of posts. They were unusually subdued for him. You had him or whoever writing things like, the Supreme Court upheld birthright citizenship, which is too bad for our country, but we can easily make it up in Congress through legislation, and arguing that a new constitutional amendment isn't necessary and calling on Congress to start today. So then a huge thing I have to hit on is, well, numerous legal experts have said that a change to birthright citizenship would in fact require a constitutional amendment, which probably makes sense to you because it was literally established in an amendment. You then also, as far as Trump's reaction, had him seemingly implying that this was all kind of some Chinese psyop, or that there's going to be a Chinese takeover or something now. Writing, I would like to congratulate President Xi and the great country of China on their massive birthright citizenship win. Though also, maybe Trump was a little more subdued because he knew that others would take it to a 10. And if that's the case, well, he definitely wasn't wrong.
I mean, I predicted the court would rule against Trump because the globalists want the borders open. They want replacement migration. It's really white genocide.
You also had poison-resistant rat Stephen Miller calling it one of the most destructive and outrageous decisions in the long history of the Supreme Court, and adding that American citizenship belongs only and solely to Americans. Which I will say just is a pretty crazy take from someone whose family literally immigrated to the United States to flee Jewish persecution in Russia in the early 1900s. Like, my man, I know you love revisionist history, but when you say like, they are flooding our borders, you is they. Although, counterpoint, if we had closed borders, we wouldn't have Stephen Miller here. Oof. Is Stephen Miller being in power actually one of the best arguments for closed borders? Right, against any immigration or asylum? I'll have to think about it some more. But back on topic, you also had some slamming the conservative justices who sided with the majority, saying that they're traitors who betrayed the country. And while they all took hits, again, they really homed in on Amy Coney Barrett. I mean, hell, you even had Representative Nancy Mace literally calling for Barrett to be removed from the bench. Though also, they didn't have a problem with her or the other conservatives with some of the other rulings today. Because you also had the Supreme Court ruling 6-3 along ideological lines to uphold laws banning trans athletes from playing on girls and women's sports teams. And there, you had the case focusing on a high school athlete in West Virginia and a college athlete in Idaho who challenged laws in their respective states requiring that students play on teams based on biological sex, right? AKA their sex at birth. And even though the ruling was just on those two state laws, the implications here, they're nationwide, and around 25 other states have their own laws restricting or barring trans athletes. In Title IX, it was at the center of a lot of the arguments here, and in the end, you had Justice Kavanaugh writing in the majority opinion, consistent with Title IX and the Equal Protection Clause, we hold that the states may maintain women's and girls' sports for biological females, and saying the Constitution and Title IX do not require an overhaul of women's and girls' sports throughout America. Though he then also said that he expressed some sympathy for trans athletes, noting that most of the people impacted by this debate are either teenagers or in their early 20s, and, quote, those student athletes want to play sports. Their desire to compete warrants respect, and saying no student athlete on either side of the issue, whether a biological female or transgender, deserves to be ostracized or vilified. So then with this, as far as reactions, you had people who support bans on trans athletes celebrating this as a major win. Or you had the president of the Alliance Defending Freedom saying blue states with boys on girls' podiums, you're next. Though then also, in response, you had LGBT rights activists emphasizing that right now, this ruling doesn't actually impact the protections that exist in states like California, though they still are condemning the decision overall, with the President for Human Rights campaign calling the ruling heartbreaking and adding, when politicians convince the public that any girl could be the wrong kind of girl, they invite harassment, intimidation, invasive questioning, or even an inspection of their body by a total stranger. And on that last note, you had the New York Times adding that there are some pretty tricky questions that are being posed by this ruling. Things like how sports officials will determine if competitors are girls and women as defined by the opinion. Noting while gender verification testing, a long vilified and intrusive practice, has resumed at the Olympic level, how will grade schools, middle schools, and high schools conduct those tests? And asking, will everyone be tested or just the athletes who draw suspicion? Right, or to put it another way, there's a question of if you don't want someone playing on a team, or you want to even maybe just harass them, will someone just make a false allegation about some random child and then they're either barred from the sport or they have to have some sort of medical exam with a stranger? But ultimately, we're gonna have to see what happens there. The debate is, of course, far from over. But then that also, it brings us to the last ruling that was handed down by the Supreme Court today, which is very much being seen as a huge win for Republicans, especially heading into the midterms. Because the Supreme Court, they just lifted rules restricting how much national political parties can spend on advertising in coordination with candidates. And in another 6-3 ruling, they decided that these limitations violated free speech. And at least right now, Republicans are the ones who stand to benefit the most from it. Or with the Washington Post, for example, reporting that top Republican committees ended last month with over $250 million in the bank and no debt. And then you compare that to top Democratic committees who have just $127 million plus $18 million in debt. And this decision now allows these committees to use as much of these funds as they want in coordination with candidates and their campaigns, right? Meaning that they can get the low TV advertising rates that campaigns are entitled to, while outside groups still have to pay more for advertising. And actually, J.D. Vance was among the first candidates to challenge those rules back in 2022 when he was joined by major Republican committees. So that, as you had Democrats pushing back against it, thinking that it just opens the door for political parties to pay way too many expenses. And in her dissent, you had Justice Kagan really hitting on this, saying that this ruling enables a party to serve as an alternative checking account for a campaign. And adding, as a result, a donor will be able to give a party as much as $500,000 as compared to the $7,000 he can give directly to the candidate to cover the candidate's bills. But then on the other side, you had Kavanaugh saying that this allows both parties, Democrat and Republican, to participate more freely and compete more fully in the political process and to coordinate more closely with their candidates. And so yeah, overall, just a very big day out of the Supreme Court again. And while they've now officially closed out their term, it feels like a lot of things have been set in the setup for the midterms. Or we're going to be seeing post-decision maneuvering, butterfly effects. There's a lot to watch. Though also, in the meantime, I'd really love to know your thoughts, opinions, and reactions to the decisions today. And then there's more we got to dive into in just a minute, but first, let me thank a sponsor. Because recently, you've probably seen, because you watched this show, that the Supreme Court handed down a major ruling on President Trump's authority to remove officials from independent agencies. But depending on the headline you saw, you might have thought that the court either blocked Trump, expanded his power, or did both. And to understand not just what happened, but how different outlets are telling that same story, I use today's sponsor, Ground News. And sometimes it's about just seeing what the outlets are focusing on. Right? Some focused on the court protecting the Federal Reserve, while others highlighted the broader expansion of presidential authority over the other agencies. So sometimes it's the same ruling, but a very different emphasis. And that's exactly what Ground News lets you see. It compares how hundreds of news outlets across the political spectrum are covering the exact same story side by side. It also shows factuality ratings and who owns each publication, giving you more context behind the coverage. Though always my favorite feature is the blind spot feed, which highlights stories that one side is covering heavily while the other side's barely talking about it. It ends up honestly being one of the fastest ways to find news gaps in your news diet. And hey, if you want help understanding the news instead of just reacting to the headlines, Ground News is absolutely worth checking out. So head to ground.news/DeFranco or scan that QR code to get 40% off unlimited access to the Vantage plan, which is the one I use. But then, diving right back into the news, let's talk about this whole Supergirl situation. Because while a lot of people have tried to paint the situation as one thing or another, it does at the very least seem like both conservative culture warriors and even normie movie critics not the biggest fan, right? They seem generally united in their hatred for what's going to probably be one of the biggest flops of the summer.
A cringy, cliched, tedious mess of dull, lifeless action scenes that we've seen a million times before.
It's just, and then, till we get to the ending.
I really liked the quotable lines from the villain, such as, and when he looks surprised and looks like he's doing a bad Robert De Niro impersonation.
Jeremy Johns, the last guy, his thumbnails always let me know exactly what he thinks of the movies, but I still watch. But yeah, the movie's generally been seen as kind of a failure regarding the reviews and the box office, right? With it getting a 54% from critics on Rotten Tomatoes, as well as a semi-decent 76% audience score, though that audience score may also be impacted by the lack of people that are watching it. Because you see, opening weekend, the movie netted just $37 million domestically and $68 million globally, which, would be great if it was a movie that had like the budget of Obsession. But Warner Brothers, they sank $170 million into just the production alone. That's not even counting the millions and millions of dollars for marketing and advertising. And according to Deadline, industry sources are estimating a $125 million loss. And so then with that, you've got people looking for someone to blame. And so you have a lot of fingers being pointed towards James Gunn and Peter Safran, the guys hired a few years ago to make DC the new Marvel. They're trying to build or rebuild a whole cinematic universe, and their first swing was, of course, last year's Superman reboot. And that, of course, was generally seen as a huge win. It got good reviews, $619 million. In fact, the sequel to it, it's scheduled to release next summer, with Supergirl meant to be the in-between film. And while you had many with Supergirl saying they didn't like it because of this thing or that, maybe on a technical level, the writing, the acting, the camera work. Others, they didn't like it for what they said was a different reason.
The American people, for the love of all that is holy, do not want woke.
Now, of course, almost any superhero film that has a female lead, it's inevitably going to get hit by a bunch of guys going, whoa. But also in this case, it looked like they were taking issue with the particular decision to cast Millie Alcock as Supergirl. And that appeared to be for a number of reasons, including that they disapproved of the way that she looked.
At least Wonder Woman kind of looked like she was in shape. This girl doesn't look super at all. These are the memes in my timeline.
But then also, going past her looks, you had a lot of people getting real mad about some things she said while she was promoting the film. Right in the first step here, you had Millie telling Vanity Fair that her experience on House of the Dragon made her aware that, quote, simply existing as a woman in that space is something that people comment on, and adding, we've become very comfortable having this weird ownership of women's bodies, where they're saying, I can't really stop them, I can only be myself. And so you ended up seeing like a number of conservatives kind of just pissed off at the feminist sentiment there, or with inevitably some hurling abuse at her on social media, which led to her telling Variety, I didn't even say men, I said people, and they got so angry. I was like, you're proving my point. And then adding, I guess women know that this is just how it's always been, unfortunately. And it's from a lot of people whose profiles have no photo, who are burner accounts, or someone's name and then dad of 4, Christian, which is hilarious to me. And adding, but I mean, whose opinion do you really care about? If you're pissing the right kind of people off, you're doing okay. And you seem to see that comment kind of take what was a generally small but meaningful fire and stoked it into an inferno.
Like, I'm sorry, so like the right kinds of people to you are Christian dads, the most likely millennial dads, the men who grew up on Marvel and DC, who are most likely your franchise's most loyal fan base and target audience. Those are the people that are the right fans to piss off. It's just dumb. It's truly just dumb.
Or with Alcock's original quote getting twisted into this game of telephone until it became, she hates white Christian fathers, which is clearly not what she meant, especially the white part. She never even mentioned race. And really quick, just to throw out my opinion here and also share my personal experience, I don't have a problem with religious people. I'm friends with many. Some of the best people I know are religious folk. But if you are a creator, whether it be the smallest person online to the biggest star in the world, you are very familiar with the type of internet account that she is talking about. Some of the most disgusting things, the slurs, the threats that have ever been thrown my way have come from a number of accounts that love to include Bible quotes, right? And that can be factually true while also not then turning that into all religious people are bad, or then somehow into white Christian fathers are bad. But then also you had the outrage machine finding this other thing to chew on because a reporter asked her on the red carpet whether Supergirl is queer.
I don't know. I think that what makes this film so beautiful is that it's not centered around a man. It's not centered around love at all, if anything. But we'll see. I don't really know, but I don't know. I don't know. She'd probably go both ways.
With that clip, I imagine making Jesse Waters over at Fox News do a fist pump in the air in the pre-production meeting.
Guys don't get into that. Maybe that's cool when you're 18, but when a girl's bisexual, we don't trust her.
No.
We don't trust her, and the ones I've met are super weird. So to say you're bisexual, it's not a turn on. It's not a turn on.
Do you think they're just trying to turn you off?
I haven't considered that.
And then you had the movie actually hitting theaters, and when the reviews started rolling in, you had a lot on the right feeling completely vindicated.
We're over the forced upon us girl boss era. It's not authentic. It's not organic. We're no longer buying it. Like, it's not that women can't be empowered and fierce and all the great things. It's just stop forcing it on us in the form of like Supergirl. If she's 5'1", it's a miracle. She's very weirdly small. And they want us to believe she's this fierce no.
Right, you generally had kind of all these commentators and pundits throwing Supergirl into the same wastebasket as the live action Snow White and the all-female Ghostbusters. But you also had others pushing back, pointing out that female-led superhero films have seen tremendous success before, pointing to Wonder Woman in 2017 and Captain Marvel in 2019. Plus, you've also had a long list of superhero films with male leads that have disappointed over the past several years. Think Black Adam, Morbius, and The Flash. So some argue that Supergirl's failure has less to do with it being woke and more to do with it just kind of being a bad movie. Though you did also have outlets like the New York Times saying it literally might be because she's a woman. Or with the New York Times reporting, quote, box office analysts on Sunday noted an uncomfortable truth. Female-led superhero movies have been rejected almost uniformly over the past 5 years or so, perhaps reflecting a resurgent misogyny among the core fan base, which is largely male. And the report's saying that Warner Brothers executives believed the culture had evolved past that, and they were surprised by both the ferocity of the backlash and its reach. But whatever the case, at least publicly, you have DC Studios saying, we're moving forward, with their chief executive saying, while Supergirl didn't meet our box office expectations, it's just one component of a broader long-term strategy at DC Studios that we remain confident in. And so for now, we'll see how things move forward, though. Just to quickly add my opinion, I watched the movie over the weekend with my 2 boys, and it was okay. I can 100% see why it bombed. I don't think this lands on Millie Alcock or any one specific thing. But then also, I'm just gonna move forward with my day, and I'm still interested to see what happens in the DC universe or whatever the hell is coming out. And it's not gonna become my whole personality to hate on this film and or try to turn myself into some victim of woke Hollywood. But with that said, this is actually kind of one of the fantastic things of having a show like this. I'd love to know your thoughts. If you watched the movie, what were your thoughts? But also, if you didn't watch the movie, why? Because for me personally, that's probably gonna be the most interesting part of this story is hearing from you on it. But then also, to jump from that to some really, really serious news, we should talk about this North Carolina hostage situation. Because you had it going down at the Bertie Martin Regional Detention Center in Windsor, which is a roughly 90-bed facility that holds pretrial detainees and short-term inmates from both Bertie and Martin counties. And very early yesterday morning, you had 88 inmates taking control of the facility from the 3 guards on staff at the time. Local law enforcement immediately responding, and the whole thing lasting nearly 9 hours. Right, as far as the full timeline here, at around 5 o'clock in the morning yesterday, you had the inmates at Bertie Martin starting their revolt. They pinned down the guards, they take them as hostages, but one of them also escapes. And then, within a matter of minutes, you've got 20 cops flooding the scene, along with agents from the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation and the FBI. And all of that just kicking off one of the longest mornings this small town's ever seen. Because you had negotiators, desperately trying to figure out any way to talk these inmates down and keep them from hurting either the guards or even each other. And actually, 4.5 hours later, they get somewhere. They managed to convince the inmates to let both of the hostages go. And while we're not sure exactly what the deal was, along with them, 18 of the inmates also walked out, right? And then you had 20 minutes later, another 62 walking out, leaving only 8 inmates on the inside, right? And those guys, they stayed holed up until nearly 2 o'clock in the afternoon when those last few were detained and the North Carolina SBI announced that the facility was clear. As far as the guards, we don't know exactly what shape they're in, but we do know they've been treated for injuries. And as far as the inmates, they've been moved. And that's everyone from low-level offenders all the way up to those charged with murder. Right? And as far as the facility, that's essentially shut down right now while the investigation works to try to figure out exactly what sparked this inmate takeover. You also had the local sheriff being very clear that this jail is not under his umbrella, noting that it's run by an independent agency chosen by the jail commission rather than either of the 2 counties that it serves. Right? And with that, noting that questions of the staffing and the circumstances that led up to the whole thing yesterday, they're gonna have to be uncovered in the investigation. But he did promise to release any information to the public as soon as possible. Also, the thing that you've seen is that this whole situation left the community shaken up, especially the family members of inmates inside the facility at the time.
My son's safety was initially my first thought, just to make sure that he was okay. He did give me a call and let me know that he was okay and what was going on inside. He said it was just a mess. And so I just was concerned about his safety and his well-being.
And the concerns there, it was made even worse by scammers who were trying to take advantage of the inmates' friends and family. You had the Martin County Sheriff's Office warning people that they've been receiving reports of messages promising to release their loved ones if they sent an electronic payment. And you had them explaining on Facebook, this is a scam. At this time, neither the Martin County Sheriff's Office nor the Bertie County Sheriff's Office is placing inmates on electronic monitoring for release. And they've asked anyone that got one of those calls or texts to report it to the police. So as that's played out, you've also had others saying, hey, what happened here? It is a direct result of the jail mistreating the inmates.
A lot of stuff been going on down at that jail. They not feeding them, not letting them take baths, not doing that thing. Y'all feel like a riot just broke out no. Them folks down there going through stuff and they humans just like everybody else. They got feelings.
So there you had Bertie County Sheriff Tyrone Ruffin pushing back, calling those rumors misinformation and saying that he'd address those concerns when the situation is under control. But really for now, we're gonna have to kind of wait along with the community to get some real answers about what happened here. And then there's more we gotta dive into in just a minute. But first, let me thank a sponsor and say, if you've looked into healthier dog food before, you've probably had the same reaction I did. Thinking this looks great, but I'm not thawing frozen food every single morning. And that's exactly why today's sponsor, Sundays for Dogs, first caught my attention. This is real dog food made with human-grade ingredients, real meat, organs, and superfoods. My dogs love this stuff. It was created by a vet who wanted dog food that was healthier than traditional kibble without making feeding your dog feel like a second job. And because it's air-dried, you get the convenience of kibble with the nutrition of fresh food. No freezer, no fridge, no thawing, just scoop and serve. And honestly, my favorite part is how excited the dogs get when the second bag comes out. They're acting like I've suddenly become a 5-star chef. And because it's made with high-quality ingredients, it can support healthier digestion, shinier coats, fresher breath, and better overall health. So if you've been meaning to upgrade your dog's food, this is one of the easiest ways to do it. Just scan that QR code or go to sundaysfordogs.com/Phil for 50% off your first order. That's sundaysfordogs.com/Phil for 50% off your first order. Your dog will thank you. And then diving right back into the news, in fact, your final block of the show today, it's more news you need to know. And first up, we have a story of maybe cosmic justice, you could say. Because in Alabama, you had a man who recently died from a heart attack while trying to hide the body of his girlfriend. With the man being Daniel Robbins and his girlfriend being Jessica Folds. And you had officials saying, based on the investigation, the female victim was strangled and it appears the male was attempting to dispose of the body in a remote location. And you had them apparently finding both of them on June 10th in a wooded area in the town of Lynette. And there, they said they also found a truck that was still running nearby, the tailgate was down, and there were drag marks in the dirt going towards the woods where they were found. Right, and then when officials sent the bodies away for an autopsy, they started to piece the story together. You've got officials believing that everything kind of unfolded in a domestic violence dispute that night before they were found. Well, with all this, yes, it is maybe a case of crazy karma. Also, at the end of the day, it is still horrifying. 1, for Folds, and 2, for her friends and family that are never really going to get get answers or legal justice that likely would have come from this. She had 3 adult sons and other loved ones that are never going to have that closure. But even so, you're seeing them choosing to remember her for the impact that she made in their lives, saying she touched the lives of many with her heart of gold, deep love for everyone, and a smile that brightened the world. And then also, you had the news today that 4 guys in Connecticut, they figured out how to make ATMs spit out cash like they were hitting a Vegas jackpot. They scored over $500,000. Though unfortunately for them, the FBI was watching and now they've been hit with just a ton of charges. And of course, I should say, all of this comes with a big, fat allegedly. But what it appears that they did is called a jackpotting scheme, and they apparently hit ATMs all across Connecticut. And despite, the name jackpotting making it sound like there's luck involved, it's actually a specialized cybercrime where you have criminals physically accessing an ATM, connecting hardware loaded with malware, and tricking the machine into dispensing cash on command. And according to prosecutors, you had this group working as a coordinated crew that targeted ATMs over a 10-day period in August of 2025. And so you'd have one person who would open the ATM, another installing the device, one acting as a lookout, and the others collecting the cash. And then going to Little Ocean's 11, you have the authorities saying that they tried to avoid detection by changing clothes between visits, wearing disguises, and using rental vehicles as they traveled from locations. With their biggest alleged payout actually coming from a single ATM where investigators say they walked away with roughly $136,000. But ultimately, the FBI, Connecticut State Police, and local law enforcement brought them down. The 4 guys now facing federal charges, including conspiracy and interstate transportation of stolen property. And if they're convicted on the most serious counts, they could face up to 15 years in federal prison. But then also in the news, if you bought a PC, an iPad, or even a smartphone recently and thought, why is this so insanely expensive? Turns out you might actually be the victim of a massive corporate conspiracy, because you have a massive new antitrust class action lawsuit that was just filed in California targeting the big 3 of computer memory: Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron. And together, these 3 giants, they control about 90% of the entire global DRAM market, and they've been posting record profits ever since the AI boom required their products to even run. And according to 17 plaintiffs, including everyday consumers and small tech repair shops, these guys allegedly conspired to completely break the free market and drive the price of standard consumer RAM up by a staggering 700% over the last 4 years. And you have them arguing that they got away with this by using the massive boom in artificial intelligence as a convenient cover story. Because while you know that tech companies are paying out the nose for this DRAM to feed AI data centers, this lawsuit alleges that the big 3 coordinated a massive simultaneous pullback on standard DDR3 and DDR4 memory modules. So the stuff that goes into your phone and laptop, artificially manufacturing a massive shortage so that they could gouge consumers without fear of being undercut. And this actually isn't the first time they've allegedly done this. Back in the mid-2000s, you had Samsung and SK Hynix literally pleading guilty to criminal DRAM price fixing, paying hundreds of millions of dollars in fines. But at least for right now, you got Micron denying the claims, and you have experts noting that it is going to be incredibly tough to prove all of this in court. Because you have things like the fact that these companies are actually restarting DDR4 production because the newest DDR5 is being used for AI. Not to mention finding evidence that they actually colluded behind closed doors rather than just independently chase that sweet, sweet AI hype money. And then not to sound too jaded or too cynical, but even if the class action lawsuit is successful, I don't actually know if it would be enough to actually change their practices. If anything, what we've seen with similar situation and allegations is that this is kind of seen as the cost of doing business for some companies. And in the meantime, all of the stuff that we want to buy, it stays super expensive. And then it ends up being a vicious cycle because every time we buy a product at the inflated prices, it just reinforces that's the newest bar. And that's even if the cost to make it go down. But that, my friend, you beautiful bastard, is the end of your Tuesday show. Thank you for watching, being a part of the conversation in those comments down below, hitting that like button to keep us in your algorithm and all the good stuff. I love yo faces, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow.